Hey, friends, we're really glad you're joining us today. Since Chris has been recommended by our personnel committee to be promoted to the discipleship pastor role, a lot of you have already said something about his preaching or his experience and what he's meant to your kids and how he's led that. But because he is a known quantity, and yet this particular role, I really thought you needed to hear some things that would be very helpful as you get ready to vote with us on that recommendation. So I thought we'd just interview Chris. Our personnel team spent, 2.5, 3 hours with you guys.
Felt like 10 minutes.
10 minutes, liar. And so we did that interview, and they were able to ask a lot of questions. And so I wanted to give you the best chance to hear some of those questions and have Chris speak to those things so you have a better idea exactly what's the foundation of this, because on the 12th, you'll be asked to express your opinion about that. We vote as a church family on all pastoral positions. And I don't know about you, but when I go to cast a vote, I want to have an informed position. I want to be able to know what I'm doing. I'm really proud of Chris. I'm so thankful for this time. Our personnel team's been confident. And so I want to give you the chance to kind of listen in on that today. So, Chris, I'm really glad you're willing to talk to us, and they're going to be listening quite carefully to hear about that. Okay. So, when you met with personnel, I think the biggest question we had was about your journey and mission focus. You've been our student pastor, and I remember when we had 50 or 60 kids, and now we're looking at 300 kids on Wednesday nights. And obviously, there have been some great things that have happened. But I wanted to ask you, tell me how you became interested in the discipleship journey, and specifically that discipleship pastor role.
Yeah, there's just been a long journey of experiences that they go back all the way to my earliest memories of being in youth as a middle schooler myself, growing up at a church in the area all through middle school and high school. 6 years of that, having 7 youth pastors, and so never really having consistent leadership. And that just kind of thrust me into, by default, I was one of a handful of people that just happened to be there through all of those transitions. And so they happened to start looking to us, me and my couple of friends, as some sort of stability. So we functionally became a leadership team, I guess, and that could move through these different transitions. And so the desire to work for the local church is where, understanding that's the call that the Lord has placed on my life, not a parachurch organization, not camp ministries or anything, as much as I love all of those things, and they've been very formative in my life. That began to start the process where I understood the Lord's call on my life in ministry, specifically to the local church. And so within that, I've never really felt the Lord call me to a specific role within a specific church, but it's more just to the local church, however I can best serve that church with the gifts that the Lord has given me based on the need of that church. So that's really where I feel like I am right now with FBC is walking with students has been a highlight of my life. I have absolutely loved everything I've been able to do the last, we count in school years, so 7 school years in process of 7th school year with students, and seeing classes go all the way through middle school and high school, and being able to give them that consistency that I never had. But more than that, probably 3 years ago, starting the questioning of, okay, I've seen a class go all the way through high school. What have we produced? What kind of student are we sending out into the world that will say, I was a part of First Baptist Church Midlothian? And is that the kind of disciple, right, equipped believer that we want to send out into the world that we would be proud of, essentially? And I think the answer was a hesitant yes, right? And I started to think that was done not because of the design of what we were doing, but just by default. We had good leaders, we had good structure. We're a healthy church in a healthy community. We had good families that were supporting those kids, but it wasn't because of the design of what we were doing. It wasn't because of our ministry structure. It was almost in spite of it. And so in a weird way, COVID was one of the best things that could have happened to, as a student pastor, I start to feel like an event planner sometimes, right? Fall kickoff into a high school retreat, into Thanksgiving and Christmas service projects and outreach, into a spring kickoff, into planning a D-Now, and then to Memphis, and then senior recognition stuff, and Easter in with that, and then summer plans, and then fall kickoff again, and you never stop, right? You're just it feels like you're on this hamster wheel, event planning all the time. And that allowed me to slow down and push pause long enough to say, I think if I thought about it for 5 seconds, I would know what we're doing is not sustainable. It's not right. Maybe it's good, but kind of one of the phrases that came out of that was, out of the 100 things that we can do, what is the one thing that we must do? Right? There's no end of good options of things we can do as a ministry, not just student ministry, but as a church as well. What is the one thing? What are the few things that we must do in order to get? Or the picture that we've been using, this assembly line picture, right? Many times it's just, hey, make disciples. That's like saying, hey, make a vehicle.
Yeah.
And then you go, all right, like what kind? 4 wheels, 2 wheels, convertible, truck, what color? Like what are the bells and whistles, amenities? What are we doing here? So before you can create the assembly line, the structure, the programs, you need to know what you're trying to create. And so we were just trying to throw as many options on the menu as possible for people to pick from, and relying on them to know what I'm trying to become, instead of saying, hey, we have a clear picture, a vivid picture of what a disciple at First Baptist Church Midlothian, not any other church, this is our assembly line, right? This is what we're trying to create in a student, right?
And during this time, these students were coming back from college. They were talking about their experiences. I remember you talked about doing interviews with every one of them. Hey, what made the biggest difference while you're here? What didn't?
One-on-one interviews with every senior before they left for college. I
thought that was brilliant. Just to say, I'm going to learn from people who've been gone just a little bit. They're coming back. So during COVID, you're researching that. You're thinking about that. What should that look like? So where did that take you?
So that took me to, this was before we had Nora and Blakely. Lauren was working in a hospital, so I was home by myself. And it led me to large Post-it notes around the house, which are, my love language. I love this stuff, right? It's my favorite. But it led me to some resources that, it was a book I was supposed to read a little more in depth in seminary that I skimmed. I got good at that. But it was one of the few books I had at the house that I had access to while we were at home, and reread it, and reading that not as a hypothetical, here's what ministry is going to be like when I'm in it one day, as it was the first time I read it, and instead, here's in light of what I have been through, right? The hamster wheel event planner kind of, and then reading this, going, this is clear. It's not difficult. It's simple. It's not simplistic, but it's simple on what it looks like to develop somebody, have them take steps towards this picture that we have, right? That we know what we're trying to create. And then you back up and go, now where does that person need to go in order to become that? And so breaking it up into those 2 parts. And that's really where we started our discipleship groups in student ministry, where we're not looking for the most spiritually mature. We're looking for spiritually hungry people. We're not trying to just make their calendar more busy, because Lord knows that a high schooler doesn't need more stuff to do, right? They are so busy, but we're saying this is what we want for you. We don't want this from you. We want this for you. And to give them a space, if they're spiritually hungry, after they've committed to the group, the community, right, on a Wednesday night, after they have found more in-depth community within a small group, this is a covenant group. I think of it like you have the 72 that were sent out in Luke 10. That's almost functionally Jesus's congregation that he sends out. Well, then you have an image of the 12 disciples that got more depth than the 72. But then you had Peter, James, and John that were an inner circle to the disciples. Didn't take place of the 12. They didn't say, now that we're the 3 with Jesus, we're his favorite, we don't need the 12 anymore. But it was an addition to. And it's almost that same progression, right? It's not for everybody, but it's for those who would say, yeah, I'm spiritually hungry and I want this. I'm willing to say no to other good things for the best thing. And I'm going to commit to things like scripture memory. We have some students in these discipleship groups that have memorized the entire Sermon on the Mount, right? They're daily reading scripture and journaling, right? Highlighting, explaining, applying it to their lives, responding in obedience. Right? They're praying for each other. There's accountability there, not just to accountability to Scripture, but accountability to evangelism, right? And so you're making this covenant with each other intentionally for a short term, 12 to 18 months, and then that group's supposed to multiply. You don't just stay there forever in this little holy huddle and, this is supposed to be my group for all of middle school and high school. And now we've done this for a few years and we're seeing juniors and seniors not meeting as a group officially, but instead going back and leading a 6th grade or a 7th grade group. And that's what it's about. And I thought about it the other day. I have sent our resources that we use for this. I've actually sent it to, I counted 7 universities because we have students that have graduated and have gone to college. And they said, hey, that wasn't some expert-driven, super spiritual, Christian guided program. That was something that was facilitated by an adult or a college student that just cared for me and showed up for me. But honestly, they didn't do anything special. They facilitated our discussion, and I can do that. That's kind of what I want to equip people in a way where it's not like a seminary class where they get done and go, man, I could never teach a class like that. But I learned a lot. But somebody else, you need to go to the class, right? It's not about the expert, the professional. Instead, it's saying, no, this is all of our jobs. You can do this. Let me give you the tools and then encourage you, teach you how to go do it yourself. And so anyway, sending those resources to 7 college campuses is a number that I'm going to pride myself on because they said, hey, I can do that with these roommates or these people I was in a fish camp with or, freshman orientation or people I've met in a class or whatever.
Yeah. Well, thinking about that, looking at discipleship for the whole church, everybody's got a different place they are on this journey. And so we've got groups that really span the gamut on style. We have some groups that really provided community for people to just say, somebody cares if I exist and what's going on with me. And we have other groups that are really, I'd say, information or depth focused. They really want to dig in and get more information, but there's not really this, hey, here are my tasks now coming out of this. How does this change how I operate and do? And then you have a very, very few, what I'd call accountability groups, people who really are asking certain questions of each other. And it sounds like, from what you've described, you really kind of brought those together. There's a progression,
right? But
there is a point where we have to duplicate ourselves or replicate ourselves. Right. So I want to ask you a question that's related to that. I've told the church, I think in the video the other day, that when we were doing our revisioning process, just trying to get a better handle, especially post-COVID, whatever that was, to say, what are we going to do from now on? How do we help this generation? How do we help everyone walk in the same direction, knowing that they're all at different places? How do we get there? You became part of a cohort of guys called Replicate, and I can't help but see so much of the language that you brought back to our staff involved in that. Could you just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, about Replicate specifically, yeah.
And how it influenced.
Yeah, so the book that I read again when I should have read it once during the COVID lockdown time, right? So it's called Growing Up by a pastor named Robbie Gallaty, church up in Nashville area, Long Hollow. And at the end of the book, it had hey, interested in more information, visit our website. So I visited the website. And at the time, it was just Replicate was just what they called the discipleship arm of their church. But it started growing. They had some really big ideas, and so I got connected with a couple of people there. I did their master classes, their blueprints. I mean, they had probably 80 hours worth of training videos. This is where the Post-it notes come into play, right? But 80 hours worth of training videos on their website, and I devoured those in about 2 weeks, and just mind dumping and drawing pictures and color coded this and that, and different rooms in my house was a different theme of the videos, and it was wild.
Okay,
it was wild. I didn't have any kids.
For that
we didn't have any kids, right? Yeah. And so I came out of that going, yeah, there's something here to it. I'm not going to agree 100% with hardly anything I read, and so I took parts of that, because that's the relational side. That's the side that goes, we need to be clear about what the expressed intentional purpose of this environment is. So I saw that practically for us in student ministry, where I would have our Sunday morning small groups, right? So grade and gender specific small groups. And we would have some groups that they would sit down and say, all right, give us your highs and lows. And they'd sit back and spend 45 minutes talking about the highs and lows of their week. And then they look down at their watch and go, we got 10 minutes to cover a lesson. We better get on this, right? So we can complete our assignment, right? You had some groups that said, all right, everybody's got 30 seconds each. Highs and lows, go around the room, 55 minutes, pull out your Bibles and commentaries, let's go, right? And so there was a conflict because there was no culture expressed, no primary purpose expressed. So it was just kind of done by the default of the leader, right? And so was the purpose community? Was the purpose learning and Bible study? Well, we didn't know, right? And so, but if it wasn't community, do we have another place where community can happen? If it's not Bible study, do we have another? Well, the answer was no. So it just sort of was this weird mix of whatever the group wanted it to be. And that's where it feels like, and I know one of Kevin's phrases that he really liked was just discipleship feels like the junk drawer. Right? It just does. It's the everything. It's the everything else, right? There's a lot of other things that we do that have very intentional expressed purposes. Sunday morning, some of the care ministries that we have, those are obvious if you were to ask anybody, hey, what's the purpose of that? They'd be able to tell you. Define the win or the mission of this. Right. They could tell you pretty quickly, and everybody's answers would be about the same. When it comes to discipleship, or more broadly, disciple making, which involves evangelism and discipleship, both, if you were to ask somebody, hey, what does disciple making mean? It's that same image of, we're using the same words, but we have very different pictures in our mind, right? And one of the things that we've talked about is I could talk about football, and in my mind, a ball this shape played at AT&T Stadium with Dak Prescott throwing it comes to my mind. Right. But for you, it could be a ball that's this shape, that's black and white, that's round and is kicked instead of thrown, right? So we're using the same words, saying football, very different, but we're talking about very different things. Yeah. And that's where discipleship, disciple making, that's where we've gotten where we just we're not speaking the same language in what we're talking about. And so Replicate really helped define what we mean when we say disciple making and discipleship and what a disciple is and evangelism, right? All of these terms, these phrases, so we have a common language that we're using so that we can move in the same direction with that common language, right? And so that's what maybe was most helpful with the whole thing. And so then it gave us actual tangible shared language to create culture, to then create what we have in student ministry, where I think we're creating disciples. But one of the things that has happened, and why, going back to your first question, why I've wanted to move in this, or take this transition to leading our whole church in this area, is because it feels like the discipleship of the student ministry has just been on this steep incline, and it's been great. But it started to level off. We've almost hit a ceiling for two reasons. One, these discipleship groups, we have so many students that want to be in a discipleship group. We have no leaders for those students. And there's no pool of disciple makers who have experienced the same things that we want them to experience, right, to pull from.
So you've got all kinds of people who've had group experiences, but they're all over the map. But to jump in at that level, right, with students, with
the shared language and the culture, right, of a D group, yeah, and everything, they just haven't experienced that. Yeah. Not to say there aren't people who are growing in their faith, sure, nothing like. But in the way we want, there's nobody to. But also, for those things, a student, we get 40 hours a year with a student, yeah, and that's an involved student, yeah, right? But to find parents, or to find a way where parents can reinforce those things with the other thousands of hours that they get any given year, right? There was a disconnect there. And so that's where the things from student ministry had kind of leveled off. They've hit a ceiling with what we're able to do, with no leaders that are experiencing the same thing in other ministry areas, and nowhere for parents to be able to be walked through these same things as well, to reinforce them and lead their kids in the home. And so both of those didn't just become a preference. Those things became conviction for me to say, this intersection of my story, going back, with what I mentioned in multiple youth pastors, my story, the things that I'm passionate about, disciple making, I'm passionate about that. Helping people understand their journey. I don't want to be Moses going up to the top of the mountain, coming back down and telling people what the Lord says. I want to take you up there with me to experience it. But I know that journey up to the top of that mountain, it's going to look different for different people. Yeah. And so some people need healing first. Some people need to be motivated. Some people need to be, okay, let's just pull the reins back a little bit. You're very eager, right? Mm-hmm. You're going to hurt somebody or yourself in this, right? But there's a journey for everybody, and there's a system to that. My mind works very systematically. Yeah. That's my abilities is very systematic, very structured. So to have that, my story and my passions and my abilities, my giftings all intersect in this sweet spot in the middle of those three things, it looks a lot like this role, right?
You know, Chris, as you're talking, I'm thinking those are the things we've been scratching as a staff. Those are kinds of things that I think we know. We have certain gifts and skills and certain hot places where we're seeing people's lives really be shaped. But it's real easy in any church, especially an established church over time, to say, this is just where I go, this is what I do. And it really kind of feeds into the visioneering we did a couple of years ago. Yeah. That when we talked about being resilient disciples, it all started during pandemic when everybody was under the gun, everybody's under pressure. How do you keep your faith in a resilient fashion where you're continuing to pursue Jesus under those circumstances? But being resilient disciples who lead people to pursue Jesus, that was the part that felt like, okay, we have never really grounded that. And everything you've talked about with discipling and disciple making, that sounds like the next big cog that we deal with, and not just in student ministry, but now in adult ministry.
For sure. Yeah, we have this idea that evangelism is certain people's giftings and discipleship is other people's giftings. And, I'm just more of the discipler, which really just means I'm the thinker, I'm the heady person. So I don't really want to talk to people I don't know. I want to stay here inside the programs of the church and just learn. Or I'm the evangelist. I just want to be out amongst the people, right? Don't bog me down with the theological words and concepts. So we box ourselves into one or the other, not understanding that biblically speaking, evangelism isn't complete until discipleship happens. That's the Great Commission, right? You can go and teach the people that you have evangelized. You need to go and teach them everything that I've commanded you, right? But discipleship doesn't happen until evangelism happens. Right? You've been given this mission to get to you, to get through you to these people that you need to evangelize now. So there's the both and. It's the two oars on the rowboat, right? That if you're just strong in one, there's a lot of work being done, a lot of movement happening, but it's just movement in a circle. Yeah. You're not really accomplishing much. Yeah. So both of these working in conjunction to again equip people to know that you've been given a mission field. The day of your salvation, if that was all that it was meant to be, you just shoot off like a bottle rocket into heaven, right? At that time, but you didn't, and you're still here. Why and for what purpose? Right. It's a very intentional purpose, but it's also unique to each individual, right? You're uniquely wired in a way that I am not, and vice versa. And so helping people understand, how have you been uniquely gifted by God to be placed in a unique circle of influence with your job and with your family and who your kids are and what they're involved in. You have a unique set of circles that your unique way that you've been gifted is supposed to be lived out there. And so what do you do? Where you live, where you work, where you play. That's the rest of the mission statement, right? And so identifying where that happens, I need to help people pursue Jesus. I need to learn, that's evangelism, but I'm a resilient disciple. That's becoming a disciple of Christ, right? It's all intertwined into that mission statement very intentionally. Yeah. So, and so to help people walk through that, I don't want to make them busy. I don't want to add more. Again, not a single person is just looking at their calendar going, I got an hour every single day this week that I just have nothing to do. I'm just begging for more to put on my calendar. That's not the case. No. But again, we want something for them, not something from them. And that's to discover, out of the 1,000 good things I can do with my time, eternally speaking, what are the few things that I must do? Right? If that's my goal, if I'm heavenly minded, saying no to some good things for the better things, that's what we're looking for. Yeah.
And that's come out even in your preaching this summer. Some of the things you've said, early spring and fall as a part of that. And so it makes sense to me, especially as we were working through all the vision statement, that idea of how we lead other people. So I will say this, watching what's happened with student ministry over the last 3 years and seeing that shift started so small, then began to grow. And then this fall, what was it, 50 groups?
So we have almost 100 students involved in a discipleship group, right? Yeah. So they're anywhere from 3 to 5 in each group.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which is phenomenal.
Yeah.
Well, I'm really excited about that. I know you and Lauren have loved those students very, very well. And I think they're relieved that you're not leaving. Obviously, this has been the biggest angst for me, is all those students who admire you, look up to you, and have learned, been discipled through your leadership, through the volunteers and through the modeling you did, the fact that you did that kind of deep dive to figure out what's the best way.
Yeah.
So I guess one question I think that there will be some who really need to hear, how have you been wrestling with that departure from that role? You told the students some things the other night when you announced that I think would be helpful for everyone else to hear about your intentions regarding that. You want to speak to that just briefly?
Yeah, I hated every second of it. Yeah. I absolutely hated every second of it. I thought I was going to be sick the entire night, and then having to tell them that at the end of it. I'm not doing that again.
Yeah.
There's obviously different groups. Middle school students I haven't had for as long, and the way that things have been set up with our small groups and discipleship groups, the middle schoolers have. Initially, when I was thinking about discipleship groups, I wasn't even given any consideration to middle schoolers. I thought this will be something people start or won't even be interested in till 9th and maybe 10th grade when they get their license. Middle school have been the ones that have just bought all into this, and it's wild. It is wild how great the middle schoolers are doing with this. But that just means that their deepest connections are somebody that's not me.
Yeah.
Right. And that's a good thing. It's a shot to the ego at certain times. Right. But there are so many adult and college students and high school students that are investing in their lives in ways that I just can't when I'm speaking to multiple of them from a stage. Right. And so that makes it exponentially easier for the middle schoolers. So that won't change. Right. Not a lot changes for them. For like the seniors on the other end, this is my first class because these seniors were the first 6th graders that we ever had in student ministry. That was the year we moved 6th grade up into student ministry. So this is the first class that I've had all the way through 7 years of middle school through high school. And so for me to be able to look at them and say, hey, I'm still going to be the one that is leading you to Memphis over spring break on our mission trip. I'm not going to let anybody take all the senior recognition stuff from me on this one. Like class of 24 is mine. So that was encouraging, to be able to see them through that finish line of high school well. And then the freshmen, sophomores, juniors, being able to look at them and say, and everybody, but really more focused towards them to say, hey, I'm going to make a promise to you that whoever it is that comes up next, they're going to be about the same things that we're about. Right. And I make that promise and commitment to you with everything that I am, that they are going to be of our same culture. Right. The mission never changes, to help people know, walk with, grow in their love and their knowledge of the Lord, connecting you to each other, giving us an eternal mindset on this. That all of those things that have become culture, right? We invest in the things that matter in eternity, right? God, His Word, the souls of people, the things that we say all the time. The person who comes up next, I promise you, they're going to be about those same things.
Or they won't be hired.
No, right, exactly. And I have a say in that, right? Yeah. It's a small one, but I'm the first line of defense, I guess. And so just being able to look at them and reassure them in those ways was really helpful. Yeah. But I shouldn't have been surprised. But I was, with the number of them that just got it, that this is bigger than student ministry. This is, our church involves more than just them, which is hard at times, knowing that we're across the street, right? But we've worked hard to make sure that they know we're not two separate groups or entities, right? And we're not even this weird, not really. No, we are one body, right? One church. And this is more than just them, and they took some pride, rightfully so, and a humble pride, but pride knowing we've been able to lead out on this, and the rest of our church has taken notice of what's happening in the lives of students. And there's hardly been a Sunday this school year that or this calendar year almost, where we haven't had at least one student baptized. It's wild, right? The life change in students is noticeable by a lot of different people in our church. And so it was kind of neat for me to be able to brag on them to them.
Yeah.
Say, you don't see this part and you don't get to hear this very often, but well done. The church has noticed. Yeah.
That's cool. Well, this weekend on the 12th, Chris and Lauren will be here literally in view of a call of a different role. Someone has asked me about that. It really is. It's still a church decision. So one of the things I want you to know is when personnel was interviewing and talking about how this might work, obviously the beauty of this, instead of having the knee-jerk reaction of someone leaving and starting all over, instead you've got a blend or a bleed over. Chris is still going to be over student ministry. He's going to be leading that as we also do the search for the person who will step into that role. And so you'll see Chris going from one to the other in sort of the seamless, continuously growing role as we also initiate a search for a student pastor. And so if the church chooses to affirm that recommendation from personnel by vote that day, then starting the next day, that transition will begin. As soon as we have a vote, and we're going to be doing a paper ballot, the old school deal, we won't announce that day. We'll make sure we've got everything completely tabulated and audited so we can give you the result of the church vote. But from that point on, then Chris would assume that responsibility as a discipleship pastor while continuing that process with students. So I love that we won't have a knee-jerk reaction. We won't be dropping students with nothing. And so Chris will start to make those transitions. And all of you guys who are adults will watch that. If you're watching this as a student, then you'll still have Chris accessible. And there will be a transition that will be slow and thoughtful and intentional for that. So remind you on the 12th, that's when we'll be considering this. We wanted to give you this ahead of time, but we wanted to give you the best possible chance to hear why our whole personnel team and our staff felt comfortable and confident about recommending Chris for this position. So I hope you'll be here with us on the 12th to participate in that day and express what you sense the Spirit leading you to do in that regard. Hey, thanks for your time. Hope you enjoyed it. I probably will never have another time when I don't interrupt as infrequently as I did. So I hope this was helpful. We'll see you soon.